Welcome to the Art Marketing Podcast, the very first episode of the Art Marketing Podcast, or AMP for short, potentially. This is going to be the podcast that's going to detail how to sell art online, how to potentially double your art business this year. It's going to cover marketing strategies, tactics, and tips. They're going to attempt to get you to consistent monthly sales from your art. And, whether you're looking to just earn some side cash to get your art business up off the ground, or whether even potentially to become a full-time artist, or you're a full-time artist already. We hope that this is going to be the podcast for you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Patrick Shanahan. I run marketing at a company called Art Storefronts. If you guys have never heard of us, what do? We sell software. It's a hosted e-commerce platform for print studios, art galleries, and artists, the three legs of the stool, if you will. And it's not a marketplace, which is a common misconception. It's not a solution where there's a bunch of art from a bunch of different people and we drive all the traffic to it, like an Etsy or a Fine Art America and art.com. No, we are a hosted e-commerce solution. You own your own website. It lives on a domain that you own and control, and you're responsible for driving traffic to it. And obviously, driving traffic to a website is a big and difficult task. And so that's what we spend the majority of our time doing, educating artists and art sellers on the best marketing tactics and strategies that they can employ to drive traffic to their websites, grow their email list, and make more sales. So that's the brief intro of the podcast. And kind of want to riff on that a little bit. So let me riff on that a little bit. Then I want to tell you, laser focus in on who exactly this podcast is for. Then we'll get into kind of the conceptual outline of where and what the vision is for this podcast, and then kind of tease some of our upcoming content. And then we'll slap a bow on it and call that episode number 1. So first, the quick housekeeping, right? Where's the fancy intro music, the fancy segues, the really clean intro voiceover by some extremely talented English voiceover talent that just makes you feel like you're traveling and puts a warm, fuzzy feeling in your stomach? We don't have any of that yet. At least if you're listening to this, somewhat early on in the process, we don't have any of that yet. I mean, I rattled through 6 or 7, maybe even 10 different taglines there and wandered all over the place on what the podcast is, where it's going, and even the name. Why? Why am I even telling you that, right? Let me give you a quote. And it's a quote that I absolutely love, and it's from a guy named Reid Hoffman. He's the guy that founded LinkedIn. And the quote is, and I can give you the gist because the gist is just as important. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. I think we've got to let that one sink in a little bit. I'll say it again because I really do find it to be profound. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product and or insert first version of your podcast, or most importantly, first version of your art website, then you've launched too late, right? We live on that quote. We love that quote. I mean, we love that quote so much, we absolutely practice what we preach. This podcast is nowhere near as polished as it could be, should be in the first episode, but we don't care. We're launching and we're getting going. Why? Because the minute that we launch, we're going to email the entire list. We're going to get feedback. That feedback is going to inform our future decisions on what this podcast is, what the tagline is, what direction it's going. It's not going to move the entire ship conceptually, but it's going to help us refine it. And we're going to be able to do that with your feedback rather than trying to outsmart the marketplace ourselves and, attempt to know ahead of time without getting your feedback what it is that you guys want. Now, why did I go on that rant? That was a strange tangent to hear this early on a podcast, because I see way too many artists making this mistake. Whether you're talking about artists that are coming onto our platform, or whether you're hosting somewhere else, or the feedback I get on the Facebook comments, I can't tell you how many times you artists get these creative ideas in your head that if you just get a few more pieces ready to go and then launch your website, you'll be ready. Or if you just work out the copy, or you just refine the design a little bit more, you're almost ready to get launched. You're almost ready to get started. Launch immediately. You're never going to know how successful you can be or can't be until you get launched. If you're not embarrassed by that first version of your product, you've launched too late. So wanted to kind of plant my flag in the sand, for lack of a better term, on this concept, and to use it to say, we practice what we preach. I don't know the final direction of this podcast or what the final taglines are going to be. We're going to get into more and stuff later, even in this podcast. But I want to plant my flag and say, not knowing those taglines, not knowing the fancy voiceover or the cool music segue, which, by the way, I can't wait to get that done. I hope I figure out this language quickly. But what I can plant my flag on is nothing that we're going to talk about on this podcast, nothing that we're going to advocate on this podcast comes from anywhere but experience, education, and data. We practice what we preach, and we want to make that a mainstay, a pillar, a foundation of the podcast going forward. So we advocate that you launch as quickly as you can as an artist. We encourage and really poke and prod and push everyone that's on our platform to do it, because we think the sooner you do it, the sooner you start generating traffic, the sooner you start building your email list, the quicker you're going to get to success. So that was a quick rant. Let's pivot to who this podcast is for. All right, so let's answer who is this podcast for? Who is it designed for? When I was growing up, one of my best friend's dads, just a really sage man. He had some of the best sayings ever. And he would have this one, say me and my buddy and I are in the backyard messing around doing whatever. And he would take a look at us and say, boys, there's only two kinds of people in this world, lifters and leaners. Only two kinds. Be a lifter. Be a lifter, boys. Love that quote. Well, when we thought about who this podcast is for, we didn't need to think about it. We know, because we've got the data. There's only two kinds of artists that are attempting to sell art online in this, the year of our Lord 2017. You are in Group A if you're just getting started, you don't have a website that's online, and you have not attempted to sell on one of the third-party marketplaces out there, i.e. a Fine Art America or an Art.com or a Saatchi Art or an Etsy or any other marketplace, Redbubble, some of the other ones that are out there. If you haven't done either of those two things, you're in Group A. Group B, pretty much the opposite. You've had a website online which you've attempted to sell art on, could be for years, as little as a year, but you've attempted to do so, and you've potentially attempted to sell in one of those third-party marketplaces, or both, right? And again, our data has led us to this conclusion. And I want to come out and say right away that if you're in Group A, don't have your own website, have not attempted to sell online, this isn't the podcast for you. It's not designed for you, not for you. Now, I don't want that to sound exclusionary or judgmental. You're probably saying, you tyrant, that's me. How dare you say that? I'll decide what podcast is for me. And of course you can. But trying to sell art online, and artists on selling art online, and attempting to design a podcast for both of those groups is attempting to boil the ocean, right? That is a job for the SS failboat who's ready to set sail. We're not. One of my favorite internet memes. I'll include a link of this thing in the show notes. But attempting to boil the ocean, the concept is that it's too big of a problem. It's going to take you forever. You need to have some focus. So the focus of this podcast is really Group B. And again, the data guides us to this point. If you're in Group A, we believe that you have two steps to take. One is you need to pass the Does My Art Suck test. And what does that mean? How would you answer this question? Have you sold art in any form to people not named mom, brother, dad, family members, girlfriend, and or close friends? If you can answer that question in the affirmative, i.e. you have sold your art to a complete stranger that bought it because they like the art, then you're ready to move on to the second step. And one side note, no one's saying you're a good artist or a bad artist. Let me tell you, there are thousands of artists that have had to pivot from one style to a different niche, and they've done great. So step one, you got to get through the Does My Art Suck test. If you're through that test, you need to get your art online immediately. Go get a website up as quickly and as cheaply as possible. I recommend WordPress. I love WordPress, but there's others. Or attempt to sell in those third-party marketplaces and get the validation that you need. If you're in Group B, you have a completely different set of expectations. And, I think if we told 95 out of 100 of you, 95 out of 100 of you would say, all agree with the statement, selling art online is hard. It is difficult. Most likely you probably failed at it yourself. You probably don't know many people that have had any level of success doing it. You are probably extremely frustrated, and you're probably just about ready to throw your arms up in the air and take up gardening because, artists they can't succeed in today's day and age, right? This podcast, my friends, is aimed directly at you. And I can say, this is one of the benefits of being able to do this, being backed by data, is we have, several thousand artists on our platform. I get to see all of the data for the artists that are doing extremely well, admittedly a small number, on down to the artists that have just gone from selling their first couple of pieces to being up over the $1,000 mark, to everybody in between. Everybody's got their own journey and they're on their own pace. The data that I get to extract from those, both that are doing well and both that are in the mid-tier, gives us the ability to present content and present information and what we believe is a plan that you guys can follow to get yourself to the point where you're selling art online, you're making consistent monthly sales, right? Which is the goal of this podcast. So if you're in that group B, this is who that podcast is for. If you're in group A, highly recommend you take those first two steps. But of course, you're free to listen to it too. Don't mean to be exclusionary in the slightest, but that's kind of the big dividing line that we found. So what I'd like to do from here is talk conceptually about the plan that we're going to be advocating for the year 2017 that's going to inform the majority of the content that's going to end up on this show. And then I want to dance around on some of the new topics that we're going to be coming up. And I think that at that point, it'd be a great time to wrap up this first episode. You'll know what to expect in the coming episodes. And my hope is you'll be excited that I've piqued your interest at least a little bit, such that you might actually subscribe to the podcast, which would be flattering. So let's get into the conceptual side of things. All right, so let's get into the conceptual basics. I guess you could even say the foundation that's going to underpin everything that we're going to advocate going forward on this podcast. And have you ever seen the movie Casino, directed by Scorsese? It was released in 1995, I believe. Man, am I getting old? Anyway, De Niro's character in the movie has got a guy, an employee, that he's dressing down on the casino floor, and he says to him, there's the right way, the wrong way, and the way that I do things. And that's what we're advocating here. Are we saying that we have all the answers and that we know everything and literally the sun rises when we get out of bed in the morning? No. But we've been marketing for a long time. We've been in this space for a while. We feel like we have a pretty good system. We have the data to back it up. And we believe that this system really works. And the thing that I love about this system, or let's just say the conceptual framework that we're going to talk about, it's no different for you as the online art seller and entrepreneur than it is for us at Art Storefronts trying to hawk software. We're in the same boat, the same fundamentals apply. Now, in certain cases, you're going to talk about your buddy Jim, who's only on Instagram, and he's only ever been on Instagram, and he's selling hundreds of thousands of dollars of art a year just on Instagram. And that's totally fine. The right way, the wrong way, the way we do things. There's always going to be outliers. There's another one I've heard about called Bigfoot. Everybody's heard about him, but nobody's ever seen him. The point is that there's no silver bullets here. What we're advocating the basics, and then we want to build on top of them. So what are the basics? And we really do believe whether you're getting started, picking up steam, or on fire, these things apply. 1, everybody needs a home base. You need a URL that you own, that no one can take away from you. You have the deed in your hand. You're not renting, that you control on the internet. It can be anywhere, hosted by anybody. That part doesn't matter, but you need your own URL that you're driving traffic to. You need to be growing, this is point 2, need to be growing your email list. It is still, as of right now, this moment in time, pretty much the most effective marketing channel. If you're just going to make a blanket statement, it certainly is for us at Art Storefronts. It certainly will be for you, our opinion. You need to be emailing that list on a regular basis. And I'm not talking about once every 6 months or not often. I'm talking you need to regularly be emailing that list. We're going to get into those different capacities, but think it's no different than that plant you have sitting in your office. It needs water. It needs love. Your email list is the same thing. You need to be working on generating traffic to your website. Going to be a huge subject of this podcast and much of what we delve into, but you need to be driving traffic to your website and growing the traffic to your website, growing your email list. And we also believe in one fifth critical one, which doesn't necessarily apply to our business, but does to yours. Everybody should be discounting, and especially discounting on the holidays. Now, we're not trying to get into the nitty gritty about discounting, and I'm an artist and I don't like discounting my work and I don't want to discount my work and I would never discount my work, to which I say that's fantastic. There's you and there's Louis Vuitton, because there's nobody else out there that discounts aside from you and Louis Vuitton. So I think that's fantastic that you're in that particular stratosphere, and it must be nice. Let me know where your yacht's parked. I'll check it out the next time I'm in Saint-Tropez. In all seriousness, though, there's a lot of charged energy around the discounting thing. And, I don't want to play it up or play it down. There's many different ways we can define what a discount is. But we have found that if you're selling art online and you're being aggressive with discounts of some format or another during the holidays, and, especially in that last period of the year as an art seller, if you engage in that activity, you're going to do fantastically well. And we're going to get way into the weeds on everything related to that subject: how you discount, when you discount, the tactics, the strategies, how many emails to send, all of it. But let's just reiterate those points quickly. You have to have a home base. You need to be growing your email list. You need to be emailing that list. You need to work on generating traffic to your website, and you should be discounting during the holidays. We believe that if you focus on those pillars, on that foundation, at that point in time, it really just becomes about focus and then pressure over time, about doing the work, consistently doing the work, getting better day by day. And, it doesn't happen overnight. And as we're talking about playing around with concepts for the podcast, one of the ones that I really like is double your business. Like, be reasonable about what you're going to be able to achieve in a year. And I'm not trying to cap your ambition. I'm just saying pressure over time, measured incremental growth. You get better bit by bit by bit. There's so much focus out there and talk out there about the silver bullet and the grass is always greener and just this amazing new tactic that so-and-so told me at the coffee shop. Whatever it is, all of that is BS in my opinion. There is no shortcut to doing the work. You don't just come into a room and flip the audience switch, and the next thing you know, you have an audience, and fish don't jump in the boat. I've been on the earth long enough to know that none of that happens. But if you have a plan, you focus, and you do the work, pressure over time, we think you can get there. We think you can double your business, potentially double it many times over if you're on the smaller scale of things, but potentially double your business in a year. And that's what we want this podcast to focus on. We're going to give you our recipe, our secret sauce of what that looks like, how you get there. In-depth focus on the individual techniques, the pros and cons, what we advocate. We're going to bring guests on. We're going to have success stories. Throw all kinds of things against the wall, centering around these topics and see what happens. And I said I'd pivot from the foundation into the individual topics. Like, each one of them is critical in their own right? Yeah, you need to be growing your email list. So let's just assume we all have websites, or whether you host with us or somewhere else, you've got the website piece taken care of. Okay, so you need to be growing your email list. How do you do that? What do you go about? What is the software? Where do you capture those emails? Do you do it online? Do you do it offline? How do those two work in conjunction? So there'll be a number of different topics in that silo. Everybody needs to be emailing the list. How often do you email the list? What type of subject lines? What about the copywriting, the imaging, the links? What email service provider should you be using? When to discount versus when to not discount, and sending the. We're going to cover all of those topics. Can't wait to cover those topics. We're going to do a deep dive into traffic generation, and we're going to start very quickly on Facebook. We believe very strongly in Facebook, by extension Instagram, which they own, offers two of the greatest opportunities to grow your website if and only if to grow your website and sales, if and only if you're capturing email and have your own website. See how they all build on one another. So we're going to get deep into Facebook, all the specifics about Facebook. Art Storefronts as a business spends a tremendous amount of money on Facebook. It's how we get most of our new email subscribers and most of our new customers. And again, we practice what we preach. We think the opportunity exists even more so for you artists. So how do you do it? How do you get into that? So we're going to hit that incredibly hard. And then everything else that has to do with traffic generation strategies. And, it's a combination of online and offline activities. It's finding the channels that work for you. And there's a myriad of different ones. There's a myriad of different ones out there. So we'll talk about what's working for some artists, what's not working for other artists, what we see internally in our data as traffic sources that are the most valuable. Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it email marketing? Is it SEO? What about listing on some of these third-party marketplaces? What about offline sales? So all of those things we endeavor to cover in the podcast and in the weeks and months to come. And we're really excited about it. We hope it proves out to be a solid educational venue, and we really hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and let us know what you think. Now, this is episode 1. We really just wanted to introduce it, but I wouldn't be a marketer if I didn't ask you to, if you like what you're hearing so far, and that does seem like a direction you want us to go in, there is a great way you can provide feedback for us on that, and that would be to subscribe to the podcast and to potentially leave a review on iTunes. You could say anything. Patrick, you're on the right track. Patrick, you insulted me. I don't like you, or anything in between. But we'd love to get a review, love to hear from you, and look for our upcoming episodes, which is going to dive into all the various different tactics. But I really want to thank you for listening today, and really, really, we're so excited to bring the Art Marketing Podcast to you, and we'll see you in a future episode.